Welcome you back to the second day of the Carter Conference. We have quite the panel arranged for today. Just a couple of announcements. Patricio Batzigama will be here this afternoon, so we're going to do a little bit of a switch around of our schedule to accommodate so that we can all see his talk. He'll be talking after lunch at 2:30, and then we will just shift the schedule around that. The closing remarks will be much shorter, and we will still end on time. And then also conference presenters and chairs and discussants. We have a ride schedule made up for tonight's dinner to avoid any confusion. So if you could see Susan and I about that, we'll let you know who you're riding with. So with those announcements, I'd like to welcome you to the first panel, Kongo. I forget what this panel is called. Kongo in History 2, something like that. And welcome our first presenter, Jelmer Vos.
Good morning. Thank you, Carly. And thank you to the conference organizers, Hein, Robin, and Susan for putting this together and creating a wonderful museum catalog. We're a little bit behind it. I won't insist on my 20 minutes. If I'm done within the 20 minutes, then so maybe I'm done by 9:30. So we can catch up. Yeah, so I submitted a paper on Kingdom of Kongo after the slave trade from 1860 to 1880, rough dates. But I will go a little bit off script today and explain that the paper is really part of a larger project on the history of the Kingdom of Kongo from 1860, more or less, the end of the slave trade in Congo, to the Great Revolt of the Lande of Buddha in 1913. And let me start with an observation. The history of the kingdom itself, as opposed to the wider Congo region, has been studied mainly in the era of the slave trade. It's really something remarkable, I think. So classic studies include those of John Thornton, Anne Hilton, and Susan Hurley. In particular, Susan Hurley's PhD thesis. It also includes the study of cultural ramifications of the kingdom through the Congo diaspora in the Americas. And there we can think of the work of the Melody Sosa, the coronation rites in Brazil, studies like that, John Thornton's own work on royalist restorations in Saint-Domingue, or the Catholic factor in popular resistance in the Low Country South, work by Jason Young, just to mention a few examples. It has furthermore been recognized that the Congo political movement in Kinshasa in the 1950s also called for a restoration of the kingdom, which, however, as White McGavill already explained in 1972, nothing is really new. These movements really aimed to restore chiefship as a moral principle. So they didn't really aim to restore the kingdom because that was politically impossible. It was about a moral principle. So restoration movements like Abako and the more recent Bunda Biakombu are well known. We still know little about Ngwisako, a Catholic monarchist group of exiled Angolans in Kinshasa around 1960 that also aimed to restore the kingdom. There's some massive file in the Portuguese archives on this movement, but I think nobody has really studied them yet. But they kept the same language as these other restoration movements. My point is, however, that the kingdom has been studied in Africa during the slave trade, in the Americas as a result of the slave trade, and then it pops up again in a utopian form in Kinshasa in the 1950s. But what happened with the kingdom itself after the slave trade ended in the early 1860s, and on through the period of Portuguese colonial rule? The general impression seems to be that as a political institution, the kingdom had all but vanished at the start of the colonial era. In an otherwise splendid article on how we have to conceptualize the post-1700 Kingdom of Congo beyond the notion of decline, Susan Hurley called the late 19th century kingdom little more than a memory for the Bakongo, and the king no more than a bargaining chip in local power struggles. So this is really towards the end of the 19th century. In a recent travelogue, Daniel Metcalf wrote, "What little remained of the Congo kingdom by the late 19th century was dismembered by the European powers at the Conference of Berlin in 1885. Now, there's a bit of a contradiction in this remark, because by the time of the Berlin Conference, the Congo Kingdom really wasn't that large anymore. But the point is clear. The kingdom was insignificant in Daniel Metcalf's impressions. I mean, he's a travel writer, and admirably so, very entertaining and stuff. Good visit to Kongo and to Soyo, and he writes about it very well. But I believe that both academic and popular impressions of the kingdom in the late 19th century are influenced by the writings of contemporary visitors, missionaries, explorers, and other travelers, who always expected to find a powerful king where there was none. But had the kingdom really lost importance? The Buddha Revolt of 1913 suggests otherwise. This was a real, non-utopian attempt by Congo chiefs to restore moral order in the kingdom, which had been undermined under the pressures of colonial taxation and labor recruitment. Indeed, this uprising had all the qualities of a typical Congo renewal movement, such as described by John Jensen in the exhibition catalogue. Just get this out of the way. So, as described by John Jensen in the exhibition catalogue, disorder and injustice were explained by the Congo rebels as resulting from greed, envy, and maliciousness within their own community, including, and most of all, the King of Kongo. The only term that was missing in the political discourse, which was recorded by both Catholic and Protestant missionaries, was Kindle witchcraft. But then Buddha himself was also not a prophet, he was really a political leader. Now, bring up a picture. We don't have pictures of this remarkable revolt. But this is a picture on the installation of the king that was deposed in 1913 by Buddha. Now, yesterday I had an interesting discussion with Simon about this particular picture. So it's a well-known picture, many of you may have seen it. And Victor has used it in an article. So he got his hands on it, and the caption to the picture in that article from the 1920s said that on the left stood Mandro Marquis Kadito, who was being installed or invested by Tulante Buddha on the right. Except we now think, and I'm pretty sure actually, that Buddha may be on the right, but the chief on the left is Mfutila of Zamba. They were both involved in the Congo uprising of 1913. Well, the king is sitting behind them, so you can't really see the king, but he's sitting there in the white trousers. There we go. So this is Buddha. This is the chief of Samba, and Fukila. And there is the king. Manuel Matisse Kadito, who was really a product of colonialism. He went through the Catholic mission school, afterwards became a stonemason, and a trader, and I think while he kept the royal office, he still had a business going in San Salvador. And he was not older than 40 years old. Well, this man here, to me, looks older. And also, we know that Portugal at the time didn't want to install Kadito as a king anymore. In 1911, the Portuguese Republic had just been declared, and they only wanted to install him as a juiz popular, a popular judge or a native judge, a regular chief. And it was also described that he sat during the coronation in modern clothes, a jacket, a hat, and a cane. And we can see that over here is holding his cane. But it is a remarkable spectacle because the two important chiefs who basically installed him are still wearing all their traditional clothes and also carry these Congo swords. So they didn't go along with Portuguese wishes, and for the Congo people this was just an ordinary, like a normal installation of a king. At the same time you see all these young men coming out of the mission wearing that modern dress, and then a couple of Portuguese people. And the remarkable thing is that before his coronation, Kadito had to sign an oath, basically an anti-corruption oath, saying that he would treat his people well. And when he signed it, the sixth condition said, if you don't keep up with your promises, you will be expulsed. And that's what happened 2 years later, as like his predecessors, he could say he collaborated with the Portuguese, and that's the point that I would make, but in tax collection, labor recruitment, and that brought so much terror to the Congo populace that by 1913 they had enough of him, and really hoped to restore order in the kingdom by deposing their king. The rebels met with the Portuguese administration, or what little of that existed in the, so you have at least two of them here. And they imposed their demands on Portugal. And their demand was not that they wanted to get rid of Portugal. They wanted to get rid of the most hated Portuguese person that they knew, probably this man over here. But what they really wanted to do is install a new king and start anew, you might say. So if a group of chiefs with thousands of armed followers were willing to stage an uprising against San Salvador in 1913, clearly the kingdom was still a functioning institution that mattered in the lives of the Congo populace. My argument is that after 1860, the kingdom was gradually transformed into a vehicle for colonial expansion. So the kingdom was really transformed, and by that I mean that all European actors who came to Congo and northern Angola went by the kingdom and relied on the mediation of the Congo king and his immediate followers and his family. And the Agua Usada are a crucial part of that, and that's why I was slightly surprised to hear yesterday this by Marina, when she cited Richard Burton, who compared the coronation spectacles that he saw in Brazil, remembered of the Agua Usada in Congo. He had never been to San Salvador. He had been to northern Angola, the Congo River. He had been to the coast. He had never been to San Salvador itself. So how did he know about the Agua Usada? My idea is that the Agua Usada were basically everywhere. They were very well known. And every time a European travels in northern Angola, he meets an Agua Usada, and Agua Usada picks him up. And the Agua Usada monopolize all these opportunities that come with colonial expansion. So they are the first to work for European trade houses. They are the first to enroll in mission schools. They are the ones who pick up jobs in the colonial government. So that's my idea, and by doing that, they also transform the kingdom. There are a couple of citations that show that some Europeans recognized how much they rely on the Kingdom of Congo for whatever business they have in Congo. So, British explorer Grandy. Well, none of them say that the king is incredibly powerful. They say, we depend on this man to get our things done. And ultimately, that also includes the government, the Portuguese government, who used the kingdom to impose order, to create safety on the trade routes, to collect taxes, the hut tax, and also to recruit labor. I can give you a little anecdote here. Let me leave that example to a bit later. Of how the king was involved in this sort of colonial expansion, this political expansion also. Printed both sides. The Agua Usada sons of Pedro V, as I said, were at the heart of these developments. And I agree with David Newberry's recent call for a decentralization of African history away from a focus on royal courts and other centralized structures. And that also means a focus away from elites and more attention to social and economic history. I try to do that in my own studies by capturing as much as possible from the experience of caravan traders, for example. But it's not always that easy to get to the working lives of rubber carriers, who were such fundamental players in this area. But let alone what they thought, what carriers, for example, thought. Always walked through San Salvador. But they thought about the Kingdom of Congo. But there is little doubt that the Congo Kingdom was central to the early colonial experience in northern Angola. And indeed, to understand the early colonial period, an understanding of the kingdom's role in European colonial expansion is essential. So the kingdom remained an influential institution in the daily lives of the Congo people into the early 20th century. But by then performed functions different from those in 1860. Functions adapted to the world of colonialism. While the king still possessed the highest spirit in the land and was therefore responsible for settling disputes and investing chiefs, other roles had changed. And I'll give you 5 examples here. One has to do with honor codes. While elites in the kingdom continued to see investiture in the order of Christ and traditional political titles as a way to earn respect, some of them developed a fashion for ranks in the colonial army to express their power and prestige. And those were mostly the people who were closest to the centers of colonial power. Others, as we saw on that picture, found new standards of respectability in modern dress codes prescribed by missionaries, and in jobs like being a teacher, being a trader, and all that. Secondly, the kingdom became less important for regulating trade, as the colonial government was increasingly able to provide safety on the caravan routes, albeit often with forces supplied by the king and other powerful men in San Salvador. While Pedro V never had the authority to levy tribute from his subjects, his successors abused colonial laws, especially those relating to tax and labor, to enhance their extractive powers. Now here I want to just mention how the kingdom really tried to expand, or the kings tried to expand their influence in northern Angola. So around 1910 they sent out tax recruiters and a couple of soldiers to Damba in southeast Congo. And there people didn't really respect the king of Congo. They didn't participate in the affairs of the kingdom. They saw it really as an intrusion into their own domain, and basically they kicked these people out. And they told this little embassy, if the king of Congo wants to make a deal with the Portuguese, that's his business, but he has to leave us out of this. And there you see that the king is really trying to, or the king, the king tries to expand his power into domains that, like, by 1860 he didn't even control. And Damba was really, in a way, at the limits of that. Fourth, as the European presence in the Congo deepened, the kingdom became increasingly important as a network to place relatives and clients in favorable positions in the government, at trade houses, or in mission schools. And in a way, the Agahosada, who were really key in doing this, you can see them as an early example of gatekeepers, people monopolizing the exchange between Africa and the outside world, as Frederick Cooper described politicians in post-colonial Africa. While previously kings negotiated with Portugal or Rome about the service of priests in the kingdom, in the colonial period they were expected to be effective negotiators with Portugal as Congo's new political overlord. And this is really where Kidito failed. His task was really to be a good negotiator on behalf of the Congo people with the colonial power Portugal. And he failed miserably. He let labor recruiters come to the kingdom, which unleashed a wave of violence in the kingdom, and they held him personally responsible, him and a couple of others. Not so much Portugal itself, it was really these people. In the paper itself, I look at the early stages of this transformation. First, I examine how two closely connected aristocratic families, the Kifutsi and the Agahosada, plotted the accession to the throne of Pedro V at the expense of a competing faction represented by Alpha Owendongo. The succession struggle, which lasted from 1857 to 1860, can be read as a conflict between a powerful lobby of slave traders and a section of the elite with strong ties to the Portuguese government of Angola, which was struggling to abolish the slave trade and extend its political influence north of Rwanda. After capturing San Salvador with Portuguese military support, Pedro had to exploit his duties as Catholic King of Congo in order to win the consent of the Congo aristocracy. And in a way, he managed to do that fairly well. In his plus 30-year reign, he was never really attacked by anybody. Although the Portuguese would always think that as soon as they stepped out, he would be killed. It didn't happen. He seemed to be a pretty decent alliance builder in Congo. I then explained that Christian symbols and practices remained fundamental to the politics of the kingdom into the early 20th century. For many, the king was indeed still a guardian of the Christian cult, and clearly the rituals related to the royal office circumscribed much of the authority that Pedro V and subsequent kings wielded in the Congo. But I also demonstrate that the king amassed significant wealth from being chief at San Salvador, and was able to use his influence for the benefit of his family and other followers. I mean, he himself participated heavily, for example, in the export trade. The alliance with Portugal was crucial to Pedro's success, and in many ways the negotiations between the Congo nobility and their main European patron in the 1860s and 70s were a preamble to the refashioning of the kingdom in the colonial period. And that's where I will leave it. Thank you very much.